It was late in the evening when the high-rise headquarters of the famous Dawson Enterprises began to quiet down. Most employees had already left, their desks empty and their computers shut off. But among the few who stayed behind to finish last-minute tasks, no one noticed a quiet man pushing a mop bucket down the marble hallway. His name was Samuel Hayes. Everyone just called him Sam the Janitor. Sam had worked in this building for nearly 15 years. He was tall in his late 50s, with graying hair that curled at the edges. His uniform was always clean, his shoes polished, and though he didn't say much, he carried himself with quiet dignity. Some people thought of him as invisible, just another part of the background, but Sam paid attention to everything. That night, while wiping down the glass doors near the executive offices, Sam saw something unusual. The CEO of Dawson Enterprises, Richard Dawson himself, stepped out of his office. Richard was one of the most powerful men in the city, worth millions, maybe billions. He was admired by the public, feared by his competitors, and known for never showing weakness. Yet in that moment, Sam noticed his complexion looked pale, almost gray, and there was a thin sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the cool air conditioning. Richard clutched his chest for a brief second, his other hand gripping the doorframe to steady himself. Then he straightened quickly, forcing a smile when he saw a young assistant walking by. "Just tired," Richard muttered, waving the assistant away. The young man nodded and hurried off, never giving it a second thought. But Sam kept watching. He had seen that look before. His brother had suffered a heart attack years ago. The shortness of breath, the unsteady walk, the way Richard rubbed his arm as though trying to ease a strange ache. It all seemed far too familiar. Sam's instincts told him something was wrong, very wrong. But who would listen to a janitor? He gripped the handle of his mop tighter, debating whether to say something. In the silence of the nearly empty building, his heart began to pound. He knew he was standing at a crossroads. Ignore what he saw or speak up and risk being dismissed, maybe even ridiculed. Sam took a slow breath. Deep down, he already knew his choice. Sam pushed his mop bucket aside and slowly approached the CEO. "Sir," he said softly, careful not to sound intrusive. Richard turned, his sharp blue eyes narrowing. People weren't used to speaking to him, unless spoken to first. "Yes? What is it?" Sam hesitated. His job had always been to stay in the background, to clean, not to interfere. But he couldn't ignore what he had just seen. "Forgive me, Mr. Dawson, but are you feeling all right? You don't look so well." For a moment, Richard looked startled, then quickly waved his hand. "I'm fine. Just a long day." His voice was clipped, the way a man of power dismissed things he didn't care to explain. But Sam noticed how his hand lingered on his chest, how he shifted uncomfortably as if trying to hide the pain. Sam's heart sank. "With respect, sir," he said gently, "you don't look fine. You look like my brother did before he had his heart attack." Richard froze. The words seemed to hang in the air. Then he let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. "A janitor giving me medical advice? That's a new one." He turned to leave, but the moment he took 2 steps forward, his knees buckled. Sam rushed forward, catching him before he could collapse onto the marble floor. "Sir!" Sam shouted, his voice echoing through the hallway. Richard groaned, his face pale, sweat dripping down his temple. The few assistants who were still around came running. "What's happening?" one of them cried. "He's having chest pains." Sam barked, "Call 911 right now." The assistants froze, unsure what to do, their panic obvious. Sam tightened his grip on the CEO's shoulders. He spoke firmly, commanding in a way none of them expected from a janitor. "Don't just stand there. Call for help." Finally, one scrambled his phone. Sam knelt beside Richard, loosening his tie to help him breathe. "Stay with me, sir. You hear me? Just stay with me." Richard's eyes fluttered open, confusion, and fear showing through the mask of power he usually wore. For the first time, he looked vulnerable, human. His voice was weak, almost a whisper. I can't breathe." "You're going to be all right," Sam reassured him, holding his hand steady against the cold floor. "Help is coming. Don't give up now." The sound of approaching sirens in the distance told Sam he had made the right choice. The paramedics arrived within minutes, rushing through the glass doors with their equipment. Sam quickly stepped aside, but stayed close as they assessed Richard. The millionaire CEO lay on the floor, pale and trembling, his breathing shallow. One of the medics checked his vitals, then nodded sharply to his partner. Possible heart attack. We need to move now. They placed an oxygen mask over Richard's face, lifted him onto a stretcher, and began wheeling him out. The assistants trailed behind in shock, whispering frantically. Sam followed, too, his mop bucket still abandoned in the hallway. Outside, the flashing red lights painted the night sky. Richard was loaded into the ambulance. Just as the doors were about to close, one of the paramedics looked back. We need someone who saw the symptoms, someone who can give us details, who noticed first. Everyone turned toward Sam. For a moment, he hesitated. He was just a janitor. But then he stepped forward. I did. The medic nodded. Get in. Sam climbed into the ambulance, the doors slamming shut behind him. The assistant stared in disbelief as the vehicle pulled away, leaving them in silence. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The machines beeped. The paramedics worked swiftly, and Richard's chest rose and fell with effort. His eyes opened briefly, focusing on Sam. Through the oxygen mask, his voice was muffled but clear enough. Why are you here? Sam leaned forward, gripping the metal railing beside the stretcher. Because I couldn't stand by and watch. You needed help. That's all that matters. Richard's brow furrowed, as if he couldn't quite process it. No board member, no assistant, no executive had noticed his pain, but the janitor had. The paramedics exchanged quick instructions, one preparing in 4 while the other checked the heart monitor. Sam sat quietly, his hands folded, whispering encouragement whenever Richard's eyes fluttered open. Stay strong, sir. You're tougher than this. The ride felt endless, but finally, the ambulance screeched to a stop outside St. Mary's Hospital. The emergency team was already waiting. The doors flew open, and Richard was wheeled out, disappearing into the bright lights of the ER. Sam climbed out slowly, his legs shaky. For the first time, he realized the weight of what just happened. He wasn't sure if Richard would survive, but he knew he had done everything he could. The hospital's emergency doors swung shut as Richard disappeared inside with the doctors. Sam stood outside for a moment, the cool night air brushing against his face. He felt out of place, still in his janitor's uniform, holding nothing but the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. Employees in suits and ties arrived shortly after, rushing past him without a second glance. No one stopped to ask who had called for help or who had been with Richard in the ambulance. Sam finally sat down in the waiting area, folding his hands tightly. Memories of his brother's final moments haunted him, the same signs everyone had ignored until it was too late. He wasn't going to let history repeat itself. Not if he could help it. Hours crawled by. Nurses bustled past, the smell of disinfectant filling the air, but no one came to update him. Sam kept his head low, watching people come and go, some crying, some pacing nervously. He realized most of them didn't even notice him, the janitor in the corner. At last, a doctor in scrubs approached. Family of Richard Dawson, he called. The assistants who had finally caught up to the hospital rushed forward. Sam remained seated, unsure if he belonged. The doctor spoke quietly, but Sam could hear every word. Mr. Dawson had a severe cardiac event. If he hadn't received immediate attention, he wouldn't have made it. Whoever acted fast likely saved his life. The assistants looked at one another, wide-eyed. Their voices overlapped. We called 911. But the doctor shook his head. Someone recognized the symptoms and insisted on help before it was too late. That person gave him a chance. It was then that one of the paramedics, still filling out paperwork nearby, gestured toward Sam. That was him, the janitor. The assistants turned, their expressions a mix of embarrassment and surprise. Sam shifted uncomfortably, standing slowly. He didn't want recognition, didn't want attention. All he wanted was to know the CEO was safe. The doctor offered a faint smile. Well, Mr. Hayes, you should know. Richard Dawson is stable. He's asking to see you. Sam blinked, stunned. Me? Are you sure? Yes. You saved his life. He wants to thank you himself." Sam's throat tightened. For years he had worked quietly, ignored and overlooked. Now the most powerful man in the city was asking for him. Sam followed the doctor through a maze of hallways until they reached a private recovery room. The steady beep of a heart monitor echoed softly inside. Richard Dawson lay in a hospital bed, pale but alive, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of the oxygen he no longer needed as urgently. When Richard saw Sam step in, his lips curled into the faintest smile. "So, you're the man who wouldn't stay invisible," he said, his voice raspy but steady. Sam lowered his eyes respectfully. "I just did what anyone would do, sir." Richard shook his head, wincing slightly from the effort. "No, that's not true. I had a dozen people around me all day. They saw me struggling, and they ignored it. But you didn't. You saw me." The words caught Sam off guard. For years, he had walked these hallways unseen, people barely noticing when he cleaned their offices late into the night. And now, the most powerful man in the company was saying what no one else ever had, that Sam wasn't invisible. Richard's voice grew firmer. "You saved my life, Sam. Don't downplay it. If you hadn't spoken up, if you hadn't insisted, I wouldn't be here." Sam swallowed hard, unsure what to say. "I only remember my brother, sir. I couldn't let it happen again." For a long moment, the room was silent except for machines. Then Richard extended his hand. "You have my gratitude. And more than that, you have my respect." Sam slowly shook his hand, the calluses of years of hard work meeting the softened grip of a man who had lived his life above others. Just then, the assistants who had been standing outside finally entered. They carried flowers, gifts, and a flurry of concern, their voices suddenly loud and eager to be heard. Richard silenced them with a raised hand. "Enough. I already know who deserves credit here." He turned his eyes back to Sam. "And it isn't any of you." The assistants fell quiet, their faces flushed with shame. Sam shifted uncomfortably, wishing the spotlight would move away from him. He had never sought recognition, only to do what was right. Richard, however, wasn't finished. "When I leave this hospital, things are going to change. And Sam, you're going to be part of that change." Sam stared, confused. "I don't understand, sir." "You will," Richard replied, his voice firm despite his weakness. "I owe you my life, and I don't forget debts." A week later, the news spread across the city. Richard Dawson, the powerful CEO of Dawson Enterprises, had survived a near-fatal heart attack. Newspapers praised the efficiency of the hospital, analysts speculated about the company's future, and employees whispered in the hallways. But none of them knew the real story, at least not until Richard told it himself. On the day of his return, the company gathered in the grand lobby. Executives in tailored suits lined the stage, waiting for Richard to give his first public address since his recovery. Cameras flashed, microphones hummed, and anticipation filled the air. Richard stepped forward slowly, still recovering, but his voice carried with authority. "I stand before you today not because of doctors, not because of my wealth, but because of one man. A man most of you have walked past countless times without a second thought. A man who saw what everyone else ignored." The crowd murmured in confusion. Then Richard gestured toward the side of the stage. "Samuel Hayes, please join me." Sam, wearing the same janitor's uniform, froze. He hadn't wanted this, but the assistants guided him forward until he stood beside the CEO. He shifted nervously under the bright lights as Richard placed a hand on his shoulder. "This man saved my life," Richard declared. "While others dismissed my pain, he noticed. While others stayed silent, he spoke. And because of his courage, I am here today." The room erupted in applause. Some clapped hesitantly, others with genuine respect, but all eyes were finally on Sam. For the first time in his life, he wasn't invisible. Richard continued, his voice firm. "From this day forward, Samuel Hayes is no longer just a janitor in this building. He is part of this company's heart, and I will personally ensure his dedication is recognized." Sam felt his throat tighten, his eyes burning with emotion. He had never asked for a reward, never expected gratitude. Yet here he was, honored before a sea of faces that had once overlooked him. After the applause died down, Richard leaned closer and whispered just loud enough for Sam to hear. "You didn't just save my life. You reminded me what leadership really means." Sam nodded slowly, a quiet smile forming on his face. He had stepped out of the shadows not for recognition, not for reward, but because it was the right thing to do. And in doing so, he had changed more than one life that night. The millionaire so lived on, and the janitor who had once been invisible would never be forgotten